Have you ever looked outside your window, thinking about your dull, meaningless life, and realized that for nearly 40 years, Nintendo has been dead naming one of its iconic characters? That's also the only time I'm mentioning Burdett in this entire video, but whatever. Hi, my name's Andrea, I'm bad at writing intros for videos, and today, we're talking about gay people, working on Mass Effect. I know, this is some scary stuff. If you're afraid of people living their own lives and not affecting you in any way, shape, or form, here's the door. No, seriously, get the f*** out of here, I don't want you here. So, I know I was going to do a PictoChat video, but life got in the way. I was assigned to make a video on queer history for class. Bam, here we are. I swear I take these seriously. Just don't look at how my last video ended. Please. But honestly, I was alright planning on making this next year for Pride Month anyways. There's so much interesting about queer history in the gaming industry that I've been wanting to talk about for a bit now. We're going to be doing this journey by whatever the heck I decide. As I'm writing this, I can't decide how to do this, and I'm hoping by the time this is out, I'll have figured it out, and the text on screen right now is explaining it well for everyone out there. If it's not, then oops. So let's start where all good things start. The climb to parking on the Apple II in 1985. What the hell am I doing with my life? So, funny story. Not only were gay people treated like garbage for years, decades, I'm a violent extremist now, but also, video game history in this time is notoriously not preserved well at all. So this means most queer themes in games were wiped clean and developers were forced to hide who they truly are, and most traces of these queer developers being, queer, are lost to time now. That's where our good buddies at Froggy Software come into the picture. They died 2 years later, I think. Their co-founder was one Jean-Louis Le Breton, a man known for Froggy Software. Moby Games calls him a pioneer of French gaming, and I trust Moby Games with my life, but I have no idea how reputable that is. What matters though is that this is where the oldest known queer character in gaming originates from, in 1985's hit thing Le Climb du Parking. Unfortunately for the folks at home, this is an obscure as hell Apple II game from the 80s released in one language, French. There's multiple barriers for me, so I'm unfortunately not able to get much from playing it myself, but from what I'm reading, a girl gets killed, is stuffed in a shopping cart in an indecent form, and you have to find out who did it. Bye! It's a basic text-based adventure game, which was very prominent for the 80s, but what we're interested in is the antagonist, Paco. Now, I can't understand at all what the hell is happening, but apparently he's a tailor/drug dealer combo pack. You hate to see it. Also, he's gay. It sounds to me a bit like his queerness is tacked on as a joke, but honestly, I have no idea, and no, I'm not learning French just to see if the first allegedly queer character in gaming is good representation or not. At least, not today. Okay, after writing this part, I did more digging on Froggy Software, and found this Polygon article on the French gaming industry in the 80s, and apparently Jean-Louis used these games to discuss his issues with the political climate of the time. Barton Blues, for example, was used to mock Jacques Chirac and making Paris's water system private. Actually, this article also mentions the second oldest queer character in gaming we know of, a left-wing terrorist named Carlos, who wants to take that Berlin Wall and just go to town on it. Froggy Software to me emblemizes how insane the early 80s was for gaming in every aspect. Stuff like quality control and the general rules of what was deemed acceptable to publish were still incredibly fuzzy, so these games feel way more personal and like the barrier between the game and the creators feel way less solid. Unfortunately, that means using gay people as antagonists for 2 games in the same year does not tell me good things about their views on queer society, but also this was 40 years ago, and again, these could just be jokes in the end. Don't attack gaming industry veterans for stuff in games 20 years my senior. Anyways, this is just one big excuse to say, being a queer video game fan in the 80s, and by extension also a developer, it was pretty horrible. The most representation you would ever see at a time is quick jokes, usually making a villain queer, and nobody you would ever associate with being a protagonist. It subtly pushed players towards this idea that being queer should be demonized. And it wasn't just from small PC developers either. Look closely, and you can find examples anywhere. This is an entirely different topic for a different day, but for example, Japan has different cultural norms than in America, so when localizing games to North America, they usually went through a major transformation, making things suit the target region the best. A good example of this from my research is Earthbound. In the opening of the game, Ness is butt-ass naked, as in Japan that represents being in a raw state of mind, like a dream. It's literally in his mind, so yeah. In the North American release, he is instead wearing pajamas, not just because seeing a naked child in a Nintendo game is really fucking weird, but also because the reasoning for it makes no sense here. The Ku Klux Klan. Anyways, this brings us to everybody's favorite game ever, Final Fight on the Super Nintendo. It's a side-scrolling beat-em-up, like many from the era. However, this one has a distinction of beating up women. Transgender women. You see, in the original Japanese release, there was a character named Poison. She's one of the enemies, characters, I don't know, you kick her ass. When localizing the game for a Western release, Capcom USA realized that beating up a woman would not be a great look, as violence against women was a major concern around game publishers at the time. This happened after, but I always think about the court case against Sega because of Night Trap when it comes to stuff like this. So, you have to do something about this gender slip-up, with very little time. What do? Colored transvestite and only change her name and pronouns in the West? Wow, I sure do love what this says about how people felt about beating up trans people then, and now. And thus, the cisgender character Poison was post-ultimately made to be trans. I think you can see how this says a great deal about Capcom, yeah? I was also going to mention something about Nintendo forcing Enix to take out a gay bar in Dragon Quest III, but I can't find any evidence of that being real at all. It just seems like an internet rumor. Womp womp. Okay, so this is just talking about games with queer characters, but almost entirely designed by straight creators, or companies where the queerness is only in one region. How about an incredibly veteran queer developer? Oh, it's Mule Time, baby. This was one of the first games published by one tiny little company called Electronic Arts. Basically, Mule is a strategy board game like multiplayer party game sort of thing. It's very hard to describe. You play against 3 other players, or CPU if you have no friends, and try to make your colony the wealthiest whilst also surviving the longest. Oh, also this game influenced Pikmin. Let's look at the designer of this game. Miyamoto is on record saying was a big influence on his favorite franchise ever. I don't need a source for it. Have you seen his love for these creatures? Anyways, her name was Danielle Buntenberry. She was not just another video game designer, she was considered one of the greatest of all time. Her games were mostly early PC titles, but her games also paved the way for multiplayer gaming on PCs, with several of them being highly influential. Not just anyone can inspire games like SimCity, Civilization, and again, Pikmin. But for most of her time in the industry, she wasn't out actually. She only transitioned in 1992, and around that time she stopped designing games, trying to hide from the general public and the industry in general. In 1997, she would release her final game and pass away about a year later from lung cancer. Berry is a game designer who 100% deserves to be discussed in the same ways Hideo Kojima or Eiji Aonuma are. She just isn't for whatever reason. Without her, the entire gaming industry would be entirely different. Now it feels horrible just to ignore someone so influential. Berry would be memorialized in the first Sims game, which also was a pioneer in queer representation in gaming, even if it almost didn't happen. In Don Hopkins' design documents, he reflects how people offended by the inclusion of queer Sims should, quote, grow up and get a life. However, the team, after months of debate, decided that having queer Sims in the game would only hurt the growth of the game. And then Patrick Burton, the GOAT, just add the code back in, going off of the old design documents. And then we go to the magical E3 1999 demo where 2 girls make out in front of the whole crowd. And I think this is just where the world peaked, honestly. But this just goes to show how hostile the gaming industry was for queer people at this time. One of the most influential life simulation games ever created, dedicated to a transgender woman, only had its queerness saved at the last minute by a rogue developer. Even with the wholly positive inclusions, it's one hell of a fight to actually get it into the game. Now, this next person, I wasn't sure exactly how to bring up or if I should in terms of time, but I don't feel right neglecting her, honestly. Rebecca Heinemann had a long and storied career in the industry, starting with her being the first ever US video game champion in 1980 with Space Invaders. She went on to co-found Interplay in 1983, helping develop and publish many major games and helping kickstart franchises still going strong to this day, like Fallout and Baldur's Gate. I think she's best known now for her work on the 3DO port of Doom, which she somehow got done in 10 weeks. She was a monster of a developer, and a major advocate for the queer community after she came out as trans in the 2000s. In October of 2025, Rebecca was diagnosed with adenocarcinoma, and sadly passed away the following month. this is a very recent event, as I am currently writing this the day after her passing. She was nothing short of a legend, and her impact on this industry will never be forgotten. Godspeed. Now, does it ever get better for queer people in the gaming industry? Eventually, but we have an uphill battle to go for that. The 2000s was a time of growth for not only the video game industry, but the world as a whole. The internet was becoming more widely used, queer representation was starting to become more prominent, 9/11, and by the end of the decade, we were having serious discussions as to why queer people do deserve the exact same rights as everyone else. And we were finally getting somewhere, leading to the same-sex marriage becoming legal nationwide in the US in the 2010s. So where do games fit in? You guys like Mass Effect? If you want to get queer representation in games, especially on home consoles at this time, I hope you like BioWare's game design. Now, is BioWare's queer representation always good in this decade? The Sims only had same-sex relationships because of miscommunication. What do you think? Their first game of the decade, Baldur's Gate 2, had a feature where you can get party members to get frisky of each other, but unfortunately queer people were not a part of this. At least officially. Mods stepped in to alleviate this, but this isn't even bad representation, it's just no representation. Then, in Knights of the Old Republic, they sneak in Juhani. A gasp! Lesbian? Juhani starts as an antagonist who you can kill or spare, and her character arc will be more fleshed out if you spare her. But also this gives people who don't bathe the opportunity to kill a queer character just for being queer. I'd say that's a very big oversight, some representation overall. 2005, Jade Empire. 2 same-sex relationships, censoring kisses exclusively for said relationships and no others. Say what you will about Lightyear, at least they didn't censor to get kiss. The first Mass Effect is here with a lesbian sex scene in tow, but not only that, but also a non-binary lesbian sex scene. Apparently this was done to mitigate any potential controversy, but if this happened now, there would actually be more controversy. Go figure. 2009, I believe, is a turning point for representation in BioWare games. It happened in the last year of the decade, oh my god. The representation was trying to get better in their games with Dragon Age Origins, as David Gator, the main writer for a lot of BioWare games, and a gay man himself, was able to add in more queer storylines in this game specifically. However, with Knights of the Old Republic's forums, words like gay, lesbian, folk, and maybe that one needed to be censored. Yeah, you heard that right. Just saying the word gay was enough to get it blocked from being viewed, with BioWare's community manager Sean Dahlberg stating that these words don't exist in the Star Wars universe. Who's gonna tell him about Episode 9? So yeah, the pushback was immense, he had to apologize. How will BioWare pick up from here? Mass Effect 2 has nothing. I think that's a good cutoff point. Obviously BioWare will continue to evolve after this point, but their representation is very hit or miss from what I'm reading honestly. What about something a little less Western focused? Ah, hell yeah, Persona 4 time, baby! Also, apologies if this section is a bit off or is a bit wonky. I initially got my information from a source that spread a good deal of misinformation about the subject, and I want to make sure I was as accurate as possible. To reiterate, I have not played Persona 4 yet, and if I get anything wrong, I apologize. In short, Naoto is a student at Yasogami High, a first-year student who is also a detective. The main crux in Naoto's story comes in their anxieties of being seen as childish, and actively tries their damnedest to appear as capable as possible. And one of the ways this appears physically is that Naoto emulates the mannerisms and fashion sense of male detectives in old movies, seem as strong and as capable as possible. To my knowledge, Naoto's story is one of breaking down the facade of who you truly are, which on one hand, that sounds very close to what queer people go through all the time while coming out. On the other hand though, it's like the opposite, I guess? There is a lot of discussion surrounding Naoto's gender, and all I can really say is that I don't think there were intentional queer themes in Naoto's story. Maybe there were, like with the Operation Table in their past potentially representing them wanting to go through gender reassignment surgery, but I don't think they were trying to say Naoto's trans. I think. And thank God they weren't. Have you seen Catherine? Okay, I think we're out of the clear when it comes to deep, controversial topics. What's next? Hey, Catherine, do you want to be discussed? This isn't specifically related to queer gaming, so just bear with me. Gamergate is a term I've been hearing for years, and all I know is I do not want to learn what it means. It has something to do with a right-wing grifter, the creator of one of my favorite games of all time, Tim Schafer, sexism. It just seemed like something that would very much disappoint me. But also, I think with how our industry has been headed lately, it may be a piece of history that we do indeed need to learn from. So, you know what? Screw it. Let's learn together. Gamergate started where all bad things start. Sex! A 24-year-old man named Aaron Goni goes on this huge tirade about developer Zoe Quinn, namely saying she slept with a Kotaku journalist in exchange for a positive view of her game, Depression Quest. Aaron and Zoe had a relationship before this, and for what I can tell, he was so upset that someone he dated had a sexual relationship with someone else, but there's no evidence that she ever traded sex for good scores. In fact, the journalist she went all PG-13 with didn't even review Depression Quest. This shitstorm eventually gets to 4chan, because of course it does. Death threats, rape threats, leaked nudes, doxing, and swatting all shortly followed for Zoe. She eventually filed a restraining order against Aaron, but he had broken it several times by May 2015. Eventually, more targets were made. Anta Sarskian, creator of the series Tropes vs. Women in Video Games, and Brianna Wu, another video game developer, were also targeted. Anita for releasing a new video around Gamergate focusing on sexism in gaming, and Brianna for making fun of Gamergate. It's easy to look back at this and say, yeah, the ghouls who attack these people are horrible. But at the time, it was terrifying to say that because the harassers had the power to back up their threats. Even now, it's scary to talk about, especially if someone doesn't like someone and has enough power that they can just silence them forever or take photos of their house and get no repercussions. Uh-oh. Gamergate was not just focused on women in gaming either. It was also focused on pretty much any minority. Anyone who said sexism is bad or Gamergate is dumb was fair game for harassment. A lot of this was caused due to social media. Big shocker. Twitter's trending tab and hashtags fanned the flames immensely. It made it seem like so many more people were for this type of harassment than there really were. This also put more eyeballs on it than if it didn't trend. So, what do we learn from this? Twitter has always sucked. And that's all I'm gonna say. I recommend everyone watching to read up on this and how horrible this type of harassment is for every group of minorities in the gaming industry, and how it ultimately hurts everyone, even cis-het white men. And to end things off, I want to share one of the most uplifting queer stories in the entire industry. A lot of you probably already know this story, but it's time to talk about Maddie Forson. Maddie Forson is the creator of Extremely OK Games, which published Towerfall and Celeste. Now, I don't think Celeste needs an introduction, but Towerfall is also an incredibly important game. It was a multiplayer game that got incredibly high reviews for a debut indie game, and was the best-selling game on the system it first launched on the Ouya. Okay. So, on to the next game. Extremely OK Games, named at the time Maddie Mix Games, and no, I'm not saying her dead name, decided to create a tough-as-nails 2D platformer about struggling with anxiety and accepting the struggles you face. Cool! Throughout the development of the game, however, Maddie had one passing thought. What if I had big jugs? Celeste comes out, it's beloved, gets nominated for Game of the Year, considered one of the best games of the decade, but there is still one piece missing to the puzzle. The struggles that the protagonist of the game, Madeline McButt, goes through are eerily similar to what many trans people struggle with every day. Was this intentional? Nope. At the time, Maddie thought she was cisgender, and unknowingly wrote a trans story while thinking it was a cis story. During the farewell update, Maddie had a bit of a hunch both her and McButt were trans, and thus an Easter egg on Madeline's desk implying she was indeed trans. Nothing was said for a year, as trans people, even fictional ones, deserve their privacy to come out when they're ready. And I think it's clear to see that Maddie and Madeline's trans journeys are intertwined. I mean, look at their names. This was just as much a coming out story for Maddie Forson as it was for Madeline, and I find it immensely powerful. Celeste is a story of Maddie, as she was at the time, trying to prove to the world she could do something she was telling herself was impossible, proving herself wrong and going above and beyond. It works for discussing anxiety, discussing the cutthroat gaming industry, and yes, discussing one being able to come out publicly. It's also just an incredibly fun game. Celeste is masterfully designed in literally every aspect and builds off of concepts incredibly well. Here's the editor of this video, Stella, playing it for the first time ever. Wow. And that's it. Yep, nothing else to talk about. Okay, I can talk more, but to be frank, I don't think it's worth it. Looking at the world we live in now is pointless, as it's something we are all aware of, especially how often queer people are used as political scapegoat around the world right now. Instead, I'll be leaving you with one simple question. How has homophobia affected game development? Over this video, we've seen legendary developers ostracized for gender transitioning, gay writers not being allowed to write stories as gay as they truly want. We've seen queer characters go from jokes to being the result of transphobic localization, to reluctant inclusions, to inclusions beloved for their representation and the way they move the industry forward. Without the faces we discussed today, or the queer characters in our industry, we would be in a much worse environment. And without them, we wouldn't have so many important influential games, stories, worlds. We would be looking at a completely different world. Obviously, we still have a long way to go, and queer representation is always going to be important to get another voice in the room. But it's important to look back here to see how these development stories shape the future. Okay, that's it. Subscribe or something, yada yada. Support queer voices, goddammit! Oh, also, I have a Ko-Fi if you want to financially support me. I would really appreciate it. Please and thank you.